You probably know public service, and when you think of public service, what is the first feeling you have? Some might now say, well, I think it's pretty decent, while probably quite a number of other people say could be updated in one way or the other. The question always is how, and why do so many countries struggle with it? And then there are always people who know everything better, but many of them never worked in public service. And we have someone here now who worked in free enterprise, is self-employed now, but has decades of experience in the public service. Hello and welcome, Vijay K. Luthra.
Thank you, Niels. Great to join you today.
Thank you very much for taking the time, and we get straight into it. When it comes to optimizing, changing, modernizing public service, what, in your opinion, is the main reason why so many people have the perception it takes forever, it doesn't meet the goal, it always goes over the budget which was first communicated in the first place, and often the result is somehow slightly below the expectations, or even worse case, far away from the expectations? How is that happening? Because you worked, I saw that you worked for the environmental department, you worked for HMRC, you worked for the mayor of London, chief of staff, deputy director. So you worked on all levels. So you probably have insights, and then you work for PricewaterhouseCoopers, free enterprise, everything, and now with your own business. How can this happen? Because we know that there are smart and well qualified people sitting there.
Yeah, well, I think there are a number of different reasons, Niels, but complexity is probably the reason I come back to the most. And often we underestimate the complexity of transforming public services. A particular challenge is that we often tend to try and apply the same perspectives and the same approaches that might have worked in the private sector to
Hmm.
transforming public services. But of course, they are not the same. For example, private sector businesses have the luxury of being able to focus very much on a target client or target customer base. If you're in public services, if you're in education or in social protection, welfare as we call it in the UK,
Hmm.
or in health, for example, you cannot exclude what we might call edge cases. You have to provide a service for everybody in all places, and that just makes one of the reasons why things are much more complex.
Mm. When we now talk about how things are implemented, because I know that you are a very well-known also publisher. You publish articles and books on the matter, and you are pretty straightforward with that, and in my opinion, rightfully so. So when, for example, I look at this piece, high tax low strategy, what the 2025 budget tells us about the British state. This is published in Civil Service, well, one of the leading publications on that matter. This is the perception many people have. However, when you now say that the complexity is so high, does that mean we simply have to accept that public service announces a program for modernization and we all should already expect so it's going to take way longer, it's going to be way more expensive, it's not going to meet your expectation? Because I don't think that this perception is going to prevail, because many people will say when that is something I have to expect, I expect the same from the state. However, when I say, hello, HMIC, I owe you £50,000 in taxes, here are 30,000, they are very quickly telling me, and I get the rest immediately. So they expect something better. How can we make things better?
Well, I think that the starting point needs to be the paradigm that we've applied to public services reform. And I think the one of the themes that I write with a friend of mine, an academic called Professor Patrick Diamond, who teaches at
Hmm.
Queen Mary University of London. In fact, Patrick used to work for Tony Blair. Um, One of the things we write about is the need to return to a strategic state, and the sort of the features of a strategic state. And I would say you see this far more perhaps in other parts of the world, Singapore, the GCC, dare I
Hmm.
say it, in Germany and the Netherlands. One of the features of a strategic state is that it thinks long term. And I have a particular perspective of this, which is that our British disease, or perhaps an English disease, is that we tend to think very short term. That is to a
Hmm.
significant extent driven by electoral cycles, but I think it's also just it's hardwired into our state. So one of the things that I call for is more long-term thinking. How do we think
Mm.
about a 20 or 50, or as they've done in Singapore, a 100 year horizon for our nation?
Yeah. So when we talk about exactly that, and you already mentioned the important point here, electoral cycles. Let's when we think about because we also have younger listeners here. Tony Blair was very successful in being re-elected multiple times. I think there were major changes from moving away from competitive tendering to the best value method when it comes to any kind of public bid. Massive change on all levels. How come that back in the days, which is not that long ago, so I am not that old, so I remember vividly Tony Blair. How come that this was possible back in the days, and today people have the perception that things move a lot slower, and any change basically starts, oh, we're going to change 100, maybe 80, probably 60, 40, 35, 15. Yeah, better 15 than nothing, and then we go with 15 out of 100 from the first promise. Is that just a perception, or is that something which you would say is really happening?
Yeah, well, I think one of the biggest changes is that we had record levels of investment in public services under the Blair and Brown governments. That's partly as a function of having good economic growth for most of that period, but also I think we saw what I referred to earlier, a great deal more strategic decision making. So if you think about the amounts of investment into the NHS under Blair,
Hmm.
it was very, very significant, and not just sort of investment into more nurses and more doctors, but also investment into facilities, into IT. Not all of it successful, I would say, but there was lots and lots of investment and more strategic investments.
Yeah.
So the the challenge that I think we've had since then is the UK in particular has had shocks from the financial crash.
Hmm.
We then had a further shock, self-inflicted shock from Brexit, and then we had
Yeah.
another shock from the COVID pandemic. So all of those shocks have driven very dramatic changes to productivity. Our productivity has fallen, but they've also driven more of a short-term mindset. So if you think about how the British government managed through the pandemic, they didn't really do a great job in many respects.
Especially not when you lock people away and other people are partying in their garden, but that's a different story we're not
Well,
going to
exactly.
solve
But
here.
I
Yeah.
mean, equally, you could point to the chaos of Brexit and the very
Yeah.
hard impact that that has had.
Fully agree. Yeah.
What that has meant is there's been less money to invest in public services, but that's also created a pressure to then effectively salami slice to
Mm.
cut back the cost of providing all of those quite important public services, and that then when you end up in a sort of recurrent cycle of we're going to have to cut X% every year, it means you're essentially slicing off another bit of the sausage
Yeah.
every year, which is going to reduce quality. It's going to reduce capability. It's going to then lead to a reduction in service. And we're seeing that in the UK. And for example, some of our cancer diagnosis statistics have taken quite a nosedive in recent years, which is an example of how that approach to public services
Mm.
has um, effectively had some really really bad outcomes at the individual level.
Absolutely. Let's just assume let's say you step up and you say you're going to invest long term. And let's say I am your competitor when it comes to becoming prime minister. Most likely, as you can spot the German accent, I'm not going to become prime minister in the UK. So probably
I'm not
quite
going to
good to
become
not
prime
have.
minister
Yes.
either.
Okay, here we are. So, but let's say someone says, I'm going to invest because it's going to create economic growth. Immediately, as the competitor, I will say, look, this person is going to raise your taxes. You will have less net income immediately as this person is elected. I will lower the taxes, and I will not mention, of course, that this will mean probably cuts. So, how do you want to survive in a society which is so attention span driven, so social media driven, when someone in a dramatically complex system can come with under non complex solutions like, I'm going to lower your taxes, which, by the way, in most cases do not happen. We just have councils where certain parties, for example, reforms that we're going to bring down the bills, and next step they raise council tax by 10%, or at least they try to
Yeah.
surprise the price. So how do you want to make this actually happen when you are always relying on the will of people who sometimes are not renowned academics as you have in your network or the books you publish, when they do not have the scientific access or even the will to sit down and read through things properly? They say, I basically listen to what I see in the media and I will make my decision based on that, which is heavily filtered also by external and, of course, private sector interest.
Yeah, I think it's a difficult and intractable problem. I mean, you're essentially talking about how to fight and win political campaigns, and the current government in the UK has some very significant problems. It is not very
True.
popular at all.
Yeah.
It elected in a landslide, but probably largely as a consequence of not being the incumbent rather than
Exactly.
other
Basically, the
yeah.
main promise was, I am not the other one, and that was enough after recent years to be elected. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. But the nature of political campaigning has changed very significantly in the last decade. Social media has changed it quite dramatically, and the extent to which social media has changed, even in the last 5 years. TikTok, for example,
Yeah.
was not really a thing. Facebook and Twitter were around, but TikTok not really. And so, the sort of the more immediate and the more the high pressure nature of social media has really had, I would say, a negative impact on political campaigning. I mean, my response to that is the current Prime Minister of the UK has, in the last sort of week or so, got himself onto TikTok, which is a good thing. His competitors are already on TikTok, so
Yeah.
I'm surprised it's taken him so long. But they've recognised that you have to go and be where the voters are. So TikTok is one place where modern voters are. But also, I think the, there's certainly a focus on trying to generate results. And the challenge of our current era, I guess, is that without um, growth, there isn't cash in the economy, so that does limit the options that the government has. But I think part of their long term or their medium term objective is hopefully in the next 6 to 12 months there's a bit of growth back in the economy, and that will start to improve things. It'll put more money into people's wallets, perhaps, and that might improve how people look at them as a government. But it's really difficult. It's
Yeah.
we live in what I think is a very fractious environment. I think it's not just fractious in the UK; it's fractious elsewhere too. The US is another example. I would even point to uh, every country, certainly to one extent or another, is facing some kind of disruption at the moment. I mean, in Thailand, for example, you had some very significant protests recently. Even in Nepal, you've had younger
Hmm.
people protesting about the state of the economy.
Yeah.
So this instability is a global phenomenon.
Mm. So when we now try to wrap this up, we're now probably maybe younger public servants or people who really want to change something listen to this. Two more questions I have. Question number one is, when now people say, hey, I'm maybe not the deputy director of the mayor of London, I'm maybe in a more inferior or in high commerce lower position. However, how can I personally make a difference? Because I think especially in public service, you very quickly can get to the point where you say, even if I try, it's just not going to move. It's basically a tanker in concrete, not going to change position. How can people in public service really make a difference when they say, hey, we have to go for long-term thinking, we have to make a change, we have to be better than what we do now? What, in your opinion, is the best way to get this level of influence when you are not on a very high level as of yet?
Well, you can influence within your own sphere of activity. That may sound, a little trite, but even if you're junior, influence within the context in which you work. You can advocate for long term thinking. You can advocate for a change to culture and behaviours in your organisation. You can advocate for bringing in external experts. Those are all things that you can advocate for in a well-run organisation. There should be no penalty for doing those things. and that really is, sort of the starting point is advocate, go to colleagues, find other places to go and meet people from other organisations. A little plug: I'm involved in something called Transform Gov Talks in the UK. We convene speakers once a month at a venue, either a government venue or a private sector venue, and we invite people to come and hear those different perspectives and then to discuss what they've heard over pizza. So
Mm.
spaces like that where you can exchange ideas, meet like-minded people, will help you understand there's a bigger world out there, and that there are people who share your views and share your passion and could potentially be allies.
Excellent. And I think also your personal story, of course, you're too modest to say, is one where you worked yourself up. Because one thing I think we especially have to add for people who listen from the UK, people might very quickly think, oh, is VJ one of these Oxford, Cambridge, the door was wide open and you immediately walk into the mayor's office people. I think you worked as a retail associate at Marks and Spencer, you worked freelance event manager, so you really worked your way up. It was nothing that was gifted to you. So you can make an impact from going, I don't want to say from nowhere, but you can work your way up into the deputy position or the mayor of London's office.
That's very kind of you to say, yes, Neil. So in fact, my family, we're a refugee family. So my mum came to the UK from Uganda, having been expelled from Uganda by
Wow.
Idi Amin, as many British Asians did. So our family literally started with nothing. And yes, I've worked my way up. I worked my way through university. My family isn't wealthy. I didn't go to Oxford or Cambridge.
You did your executive MBA in the last couple of years because I did mine in London, you did yours at Warwick, and the Warwick one is I think in the top 20 list in Europe. So you really worked your way up there. Yeah.
Yes, I was very lucky to be able to get onto that program. And again, another takeaway for people would be I've recognised that life is a constant journey to improve yourself, to learn more. There's always more to learn, and so one of the reasons I decided to study for an MBA was to expose myself to different ideas and different thinking. And I would encourage people to continue doing that. That there are more ways to do it than just formal learning. But formal learning is a really great way to expose yourself to new ideas and to challenge your, perhaps the perceptions that you hold.
Excellent. I think these are the perfect final words. However, one more question, of course, I have. When you talked about getting external experts in, you offer help. How can people get in touch with you when they say, hey, I think VJ can be a really good help here? How can they get in touch? How can they reach out to you?
That's very kind, Neil. So we work with government and public service organisations who are going through reform, transformation, change, improvement. There are a whole range of words, but essentially organisations that are trying to change themselves, normally from state A to state B, and we specialize with helping people who are stuck or starting. What we've found is those are probably the two most difficult points in any reform or transformation journey. When you're just starting off, how do I do this? Where do I go? And then if you get stuck, again, it's a difficult position to be in. How do I now make progress? How do I get unstuck? And in those scenarios, having external people come in who've been there, done that, have the scars to show, it can be helpful. It can be a source of support. And I'm very much an advocate for an external perspective as always being helpful. We do the same thing. We eat our own dog food, as you might say, and we have
Hmm.
external experts come in to help us and to challenge us in the work that we do.
Excellent. A very inspiring and very impressive story, and also lots of expertise on all levels to see here. So thank you very much. I think these are the perfect final words. Public service, we see there are lots of options how to change when you have the right help. And I think we had one of the number one experts here. Thank you very much, VJ, for your time.
Thank you, Niels.